flexible understanding of and dealing with the verses of the Quran. So what I would like to say is that Islam is flexible, and saying that Islam is flexible is actually in itself complex. So the presentation today tries to provide not like a complete theory about flexibility in Islam, rather than its introduction. It is only an interest to understand the issue of flexibility. I'm reading the Quran for nearly 25 years, like as when I started reading the Quran like thoroughly, and I lately interested in the issue of flexibility. I was taking the Quran when I was in range, most of the attendance, taking the words like as a word for word. But lately I started to look at the verses of the Quran from different angles. Most of the work here is actually my observation, my understanding, and my reading to the Quran. Although I have included some reference to other authors who may complement the little research. What to say actually? So the Quran is the revelation of God to human beings, and human beings are nothing but diverse. They are diverse in language, understanding, intellectual, culture, appearance, norms, traditions, everything. And in order to create a channel of communication with such diverse things, you need to have a very resilient, very flexible means, so everyone can take from, understand, and benefit. In this way, we will ask: is the Quran? The Quran talks about complex issues such as the oceans, the mountains, the space, the galaxies, the water, the soil, and with this comes the maths and physics, chemistry, science, everything. How much this is complex. So Quran talks about complex issue, and hence from this side it's complex. But it also talks about other issues which are very simple, like how do we respond to one who greeting you in the street when saying hello. So it also talks about simple issue. So it's complex as well as simple. But being complex and simple in the same time, actually, it provides high flexibility, because it responds to the degree of how human beings can see things. If they are complex, they can have complex reading and complex understanding of the Quran. If they are simple, they can deal with the face value ayahs of the Quran. The verses themselves, the Quran verses are very, there's huge categories in the Quran itself, and every category has its own purposes, its own objectives. For example, we have Makki and Madani. I know most of you have heard about these terms. So ayat was, some ayats, some verses was revealed in Mecca, others was revealed in Medina, and there's a high distinction between the two groups. The Makki ayahs have been revealed to emphasize more on the faith, aqidah, to build up the structure for Muslims. So most of the Makki ayahs have focused on providing the faith empowering to Muslims. Well, the Medina actually focused on the legislative administration side of the Muslim society. So when we deal with the Quran, we need to understand these ayahs are Madani or Makki, and everyone has got its own purposes. Also, we have Muhkam and Mutashabih. So ambiguous and non-ambiguous, or unambiguous and versus ambiguous or obscure. So some ayahs are muhkam, they are very rigid in their purpose and objectives. Other ayahs are ambiguous and they can be applied in different contexts. Also, we need to understand in the top of Makki and Madani, we need to understand this ayah is muhkam or mutashabih, ambiguous or non-ambiguous. We also have nasikh and mansukh. So the ayah, some of the verses revealed to the Prophet, and then after that, other verses revealed, and they override them. So they are no longer in work, in action. We have also easy versus difficult. Some ayahs like very straightforward, like man ya'mal mithqala dharratin khayran yara. Whoever do a good, deed, they will see it, they'll find it. Other ayahs are very complex, like ayahs talking about how the rain comes down and how the grace goes up, and this is how we create, how we recreate the dead. So this is there's a very broad categories that we need to look at when we deal with the Quran, when we see the Quran. All these facts that needs to be considered when we are dealing with the Quran. I assume most of the current tension in the Islamic world, especially between Sunni and Shia, between radical extremist groups and moderate, is coming from actually not having very flexible reading of the Quran. And inflexibility in reading the Quran can lead to extremism, radicalization, and it also leads to conflict and indeed to disaster if we don't have this broad understanding of the verses of the Quran. When we read the Quran, we see that the Quran gives a huge consideration to the realities on the ground, on the floor. It is surrounding environment, how they influence them, how they affect them, what's the impact on them. It's also give attention, huge attention and importance to the overall context of the matter, of the issue being discussed. So these multi-layers, you can consider them horizontally, vertically, up and down, forward and back. It depends on how you look at the issue, but it is got multi-layers, like a small circle, a bigger circle, and the large circle. You need to see where is the matter sits, how do we approach this matter, how do we deal with it. Despite that, some ayahs display clear advice and command from God. It also provides some choices within it. So we will see. I'll give some example about how, despite divine revelation or commands or advice, you also, as a follower of the Islam, as reader of the Quran, you have some kind of choices. Also, respect to own desire and your own assessment of the matter that's been discussed in the ayahs. For example, if we read, we'll talk now about the consideration of the realities and surrounding circumstances as well, the general context. Our Prophet urged the believers to fight. يا أيها النبي حرض المؤمنين على القتال. The second ayah says, so when you meet in battle those who disbelieve, smite the next. Then when you have overcome them, make them prisoners. وإذا لقيتم الذين كفروا. So when the sacred months have passed, slay the idolaters wherever you find them, and take them captive, and besiege them, and lie in wait, sit for them in every ambush. However, the second two ayahs says, oh, you who believe, surely of your wives and your children, they are enemies. So there's a clear advice or indication that your wives, children may be enemy of you. So please be careful of them. But what it says after, and if you pardon and forbear and forgive, surely Allah is forgiven, merciful. So the advice is being given that they are enemy, be careful, but the choice is yours if you want to forgive or forbear. Same thing with the last ayah, and the recompense of evil is punishment, like it. Very straightforward. But whoever forgives and amends, his reward is with Allah. Surely He loves not the wrongdoers. So He said, punishment has to be, so the evil doing is punishment, but it's your choice. If you want to forgive. With the freedom of choices, we can say that despite there's I think that's continued. So the other example is actually, and if they incline to peace, incline thou also to it. So although he asks to fight them, smack the necks and sit in every ambush, but also they say if they inclines to peace, incline thou to it. So there's kind of openness, reassessment and reassessment of the situation, and so you have multi options, you have other choices. And also going on with the, many of the people of the book wish that they could turn you back into disbelievers after you have believed, out of envy from themselves, after truth has become manifest to them, but pardon and forgive till Allah bring about His command. So even with people that, they want you to have the wrongdoing, they want to do, something bad, but you still, if you want to practice your choice, you allow it, you can. Respect of own desires, assessment and decisions. So, as we said, even the verses of the Quran walk on a very clear, line. They still give you some kind of say in the matter, in the context. Allah enjoins you concerning. I think this is a very long ayah, but I think if I'll give you some, few seconds to read it. It talks about how if someone is passing away or would like to write a will, we all know that's the share of male. This is very controversial. Is equal to females, but actually there's a key in this ayah. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, after the advice or the commands on each of his parents, 6, 4th, double, 2 shares. But he says, after any legacy, he may have bequeathed or dead. So he has the total freedom to say that I would like my daughter to get as equal as my son. That's legacy he wants. But if he leaves everything blank and unmentioned, this may apply. As we said in the beginning, actually, most of the conflict and disasters in the current Islamic society comes from approaching the Quran in either white or black. This is also leads to radicalization and extremism. And actually, in the Quran, there's very, very, very few white or black areas. Most of it is actually a great area, provides much freedom to reading, understanding, assessing the situation. The only white and black area in the Quran actually is about Tawheed and Shirk. Is about Tawheed and Shirk. Monotheism versus polytheism. And this is the ayah, one of you remember that we talked about al-ayat al-muhkamat, ambiguous and unambiguous. This is one of the unambiguous ayahs. It's muhkama, ayah muhkama. Surely Allah forgives not that a partner. Inna Allah la yaghfiru an yushraka bihi. Inna Allah la yaghfiru an yushraka bihi wa yaghfiru ma duna dhalika liman yasha. وَمَنْ يُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ افْتَرَى إِثْمًا عَظِيمًا. This phrase, great sin, has never come again in any other location of the Quran. This phrase only came once. I've searched the Quran and I did not find anywhere else where it says the great sin. The great sin in the Quran only is shirk. And saying that, that's the only, all other issues in the Quran, I don't want to mention them, but all other issues in the Quran, drinking alcohol, given Islam itself, it's actually not a great sin. It could be a sin. That's surely it's forgivable by Allah. So this is the only, as according to my reading and understanding of the Quran, this is the only area. Other ayah supports that. I did not put it here, but other ayah says, أَفِي اللَّهِ شَكٌّ فَاطِرُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Is there any doubt that there is a partner to Allah? So Allah challenges that there's no God but Allah, and having a partner to Him is a great sin. This is the only black and white area. Quran and Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cares more about structure. So the Tawheed is the structure. As we said in the previous slide, Tawheed is that the red line in Islam, in Quran. It is like the structure. The Quran provides the structure for Muslims. The structure is Tawheed. Like to build up, to maintain the rigidness, the powerful foundation. Islam and Quran emphasize on the structure of Islam, which is Tawheed. I know with Tawheed comes other components, like believing in prophets, believing in heaven and earth. But this is all within component within the structure of Tawheed, of faith, and leaves the fittings actually for us to give a human more freedom, to give the human being more freedom to fill out the fittings. As long as the structure is there and it's not going to be wiped off or destroyed, the fittings are actually, it's according to the needs of time, location, context, circumstances, whatever. This is also supported by Ayatollah Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. He's got his own theory of the legislative vacuum, or the free space, where the Muslims or the Muslim leaders or the in charge, the legislative in charge of making Islamic legislations have power to see what is working and what's not working, and therefore they have this freedom of space to design legislations according to the need of that place, that time, accordingly, with different culture, different approximities, different places, different languages, different ages. So you have some freedom of, and this is because the human have dynamic relations with the nature. It is not static. So as we all know that our relations with the nature, with the space, with everything around us is developing and changing. It's never static. We have conquered, as a human being, have conquered the space and the oceans and the mountains and the air, and so this is changing and developing. Therefore, you need a flexibility in making laws, in making legislation. How do we deal with this? It's also worth mentioning that this is actually been, as it's been said by many scholars, that this area has been purposely designed by God, by the Quran itself. That there's a freedom in legislation, and there's a space has been purposely left out for human beings to have more freedom to design legislations actually applicable and accordingly fittable to their age and location. Why flexibility is important? On personal level, I think it's very important because I'm sure that many of you have come across some conflict with on personal level. That's why I can't do this, why I have to do that. So if we approach the Quran and the Islam we have a flexible approach, I think many of this issue can be easily overcome. On family level, flexibility enables and ensure the existence of the family. I'm sure also that how many of young or even like mature Muslims have left families because of conflict within the family. They have no flexible understanding of a human being. You have to do this, you have to do that, and as a result, we have dysfunctional and disintegrated families. Should we have some flexible approach, flexible reading of the Quran itself, many of this issue will not exist. On national level, with respect to current situation between the Islamic world, as I want to call it, not civilization, Islamic world and the Western world, I think flexibility is highly, highly important. Because if we leave flexibility out, we maybe have nothing but submission. The Islamic civilization is either need to submit to the Islamic civilization and or withdraw, offering no resistance or any just like passive withdrawal. The other option may be confrontation without having the right means, the right ability, the right technology. Or if we look at flexibility and how flexible is Quran and Islam, we may be able to develop some kind of adaptation or accommodation. At least we can adopt the spiritual influence, if I can borrow that term, from the West, as well as the intellectual side of it. I want to mention that I was listening to Mufti Suri, I think his name is Ahmad Hassoun once, and he promoted the idea that actually the Quran, and after I heard his comments, I believe that the Quran promotes only one civilization actually, which is a human civilization. What he said in one of the speeches in the United Nations, that that there's a theory of the conflict of civilizations, and Iranian President Khatami proposed his theory of the dialogue of civilizations. But actually Ahmed Hassoun said there's no civilization. There's only one human civilization, and we are cultures within that civilization. And hence that the Islam, the Quran, revealed to all human beings. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا كَافَّةً لِلنَّاسِ. I think the Quran believes in one civilization. I would like to finish by, I think my time is up, is it? Yeah. I'd like to, is it up?
Yeah, you have 5 minutes.
5 minutes? I need 9 minutes.
You need 9.
Okay. I'll finish up by a YouTube for Leslie Hazelton. Leslie Hazelton is I'm not sure if she's a Muslim or not. Many of say that she is a Muslim, but she's a very interested person who has some publication about Islam. This is 2 of her publications. Can we put that video up, Mohammed? She has her say about the flexibility in Islam.
Does it have sound?
Huh?
Sound?
Yes.
Muhammad's idea of paradise being 72 virgins. And I promise I will come back to those virgins. But in fact, here in the Northwest, we're living very close to the real Quranic idea of paradise, defined 36 times as gardens watered by running streams. Since I live in a houseboat on the running stream of Lake Union, this makes perfect sense to me. But the thing is, how come it's news to most people? I know many well-intentioned non-Muslims who've begun reading the Quran but given up, disconcerted by its otherness. The historian Thomas Carlyle considered Muhammad one of the world's greatest heroes, yet even he called the Quran as toilsome reading as I ever undertook, a wearisome, confused jumble. Part of the problem, I think, is that we imagine that the Quran can be read as we usually read a book. As though we can curl up with it on this rainy afternoon with a bowl of popcorn within reach, as though God, and the Quran is entirely in the voice of God speaking to Muhammad, were just another author on the bestseller list. Yet the fact that so few people do actually read the Quran is precisely why it's so easy to quote. That is, to misquote. Phrases and snippets taken out of context in what I call the highlighter version, which is the one favored by both Muslim fundamentalists and anti-Muslim Islamophobes. So this past spring, as I was gearing up to begin writing the biography of Muhammad, I realized I needed to read the Quran properly as I could, that is. My Arabic's reduced by now to wielding a dictionary, so I took 4 well-known translations and decided to read them side by side, verse by verse, along with a transliteration and the original 7th century Arabic. Now, I did have an advantage. My last book was about the story behind the Shia-Sunni split, and for that I'd worked closely with the earliest Islamic histories, so I knew the events to which the Quran constantly refers, its frame of reference. I knew enough, that is, to know that I'd be a tourist in the Quran, an informed one, an experienced one even, but still an outsider, an agnostic Jew reading someone else's holy book. So I read slowly. I set aside 3 weeks for this project, and that, I think, is what is meant by hubris, because it turned out to be 3 months. I did resist the temptation to skip to the back where the shorter and more clearly mystical chapters are, but every time I thought I was beginning to get a handle on the Quran, that feeling of, I get it now, it'd slip away overnight, and I'd come back in the morning wondering if I wasn't lost in a strange land. And yet the terrain was very familiar. The Quran declares that it comes to renew the message of the Torah and the Gospels, so 1/3 of it reprises the stories of biblical figures like Abraham, Moses, Joseph, Mary, Jesus. God himself was utterly familiar from his earlier manifestation as Yahweh, jealously insisting on no other gods. The presence of camels, mountains, desert wells and springs took me back to the year I spent wandering the Sinai desert. And then there was the language, the rhythmic cadence of it, reminding me of evenings spent listening to Bedouin elders recite hours-long narrative poems entirely from memory. And I began to grasp why it said that the Quran is really the Quran, only in Arabic. Take the Fatiha, the 7-verse opening chapter that is the Lord's Prayer and the Shema Yisrael of Islam combined. It's just 29 words in Arabic, but anywhere from 65 to 72 in translation. And yet the more you add, the more seems to go missing. The Arabic has an incantatory, almost hypnotic quality that begs to be heard rather than read, felt more than analyzed. It wants to be chanted out loud, to sound its music in the ear and on the tongue. So the Quran in English is a kind of shadow of itself, or as Arthur Arbery called his version, an interpretation. But all is not lost in translation. As the Quran promises, patience is rewarded, and there are many surprises. A degree of environmental awareness, for instance, and of humans as mere stewards of God's creation, unmatched in the Bible. And where the Bible is addressed exclusively to men, using the second and third person masculine, the Quran includes women, talking, for instance, of believing men and believing women, honorable men and honorable women. Or take the infamous verse about killing the unbelievers. Yes, it does say that, but in a very specific context. The anticipated conquest of the sanctuary city of Mecca, where fighting was usually forbidden. And the permission comes hedged about with qualifiers. Not you must kill unbelievers in Mecca, but you can, you are allowed to, but only after a grace period is over. And only if there's no other pact in place. And only if they try to stop you getting to the Kaaba. And only if they attack you first. And even then, God is merciful, forgiveness is supreme, and so, essentially, better if you don't. This was perhaps the biggest surprise, how flexible the Quran is, at least in minds that are not fundamentally inflexible. Some of these verses are definite in meaning, it says, and others are ambiguous. The perverse at heart will seek out the ambiguities, trying to create discord by pinning down meanings of their own. Only God knows the true meaning. The phrase, God is subtle, appears again and again. And indeed the whole of the Quran is far more subtle than most of us have been led to believe, as in, for instance, that little matter of virgins and paradise. Old-fashioned Orientalism comes into play here. The word used 4 times is huris, rendered as dark-eyed maidens with swelling breasts, or as fair, high-bosomed virgins. Yet all there is in the original Arabic is that one word, huris. Not a swelling breast or high bosom in sight. Now, this may be a way of saying pure beings, like in angels, or it may be like the Greek kos or koi, an eternal use. But the truth is, nobody really knows, and that's the point. Because the Quran is quite clear when it says that you will be a new creation in paradise, and that you will be recreated in a form unknown to you. It seems to me a far more appealing prospect than a virgin. And that number 72 never appears. There are no 72 virgins in the Quran. That idea only came into being 300 years later, and most Islamic scholars see it as the equivalent of people with wings sitting on clouds and strumming harps. Paradise is quite the opposite. It's not virginity, it's fecundity, it's plenty, it's gardens watered by running streams. Thank you.
I just want to conclude with 2 things that, in reference to what Leslie said that the Quran, you cannot read the Quran as another book. It's actually all verses in the Quran are keys and indications to storage, to warehouses of treasures. So it is not information, as we may understand when you read other books. It is keys, and each key you need to grab and go and unlock a treasure to find out where it leads you. The second thing is those who you have seen here, clubbing in warmth, needs and waits for even more flexible reading of the Quran.